Amen. Solomon is writing the book of Ecclesiastes. The key word is what in the book? Vanity. Vanity of vanities, all is vanities. The key phrase is what? Under the sun, which means the book is written basically from a humanistic, atheistic viewpoint. And that's why it's such a pessimistic book. It is a book that really questions what's the point of engaging in anything ultimately if there is no God. Now, the ultimate point of the book is to get us to chapter 12, verse 13 and 14. That's what he's trying to get us to in the book. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. That's the point that he's trying to make. That all the other pursuits of life are meaningless if you don't have that relationship with God in place. Nothing wrong with wisdom unless it takes you away from God. Nothing wrong with wealth unless it takes you away from God. And so we see that God is actually the one who blessed Solomon with wisdom and wealth. But it seems as though that Solomon got off track in the pursuit of things. Now I want you to notice in chapter 2, as we look at Ecclesiastes chapter 2, when he talks about all the things that he's going to pursue, we're going to read through verse 11. I want you to notice the personal pronouns he uses in describing the things that he was going to do. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with mirth, therefore enjoy pleasure, but surely this also was vanity. I said of laughter, madness, and of mirth, what does it accomplish? I searched out in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, while guiding my heart with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under the sun all the days of their lives. I made my works great. I built myself houses and planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards. I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. I acquired male and female servants and had servants born in my house. Yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. Verse 8. I also gathered together for myself silver and gold and special treasures of kings and of provinces. I acquired male and female singers and the delights of the sons of men and musical instruments of all kinds. So I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. That's the American dream right there. That's the gusto we're told to go for. Go for the gusto. That's the gusto. Look at verse 10. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. Verse 11. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and on all the labor in which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity and a grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun. I think the number is 32 times he uses personal pronouns. I did this. My, mine, me. It seems as though that Solomon became very self-centered with the riches that God blessed him with. It reminds me of Daniel chapter 4, where Nebuchadnezzar is looking at his palace and saying, look at this great palace that I made for myself. Remember how God had to humble him. Daniel 4. So he had this pursuit. When you look at this, verses 1 through 10, this is all the pursuit that man has been going after since the beginning of time to the year 2014, to right today. And Solomon could do it. Oh, he didn't have the modern technology that we had today, but he had all kinds of things at his disposal. Notice verse 1, he says, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with mirth, therefore enjoy pleasure. Mirth is merriment. It is enjoyment. What is the phrase that we use today? We have an entertainment-crazed society. And that's what he's talking about. Nothing wrong with entertainment within its limits. Nothing wrong with enjoying something entertaining to yourself personally. But it is the focus of so many people's lives. But he said, but surely this also was vanity. There is an emptiness ultimately to pursuing pleasure just for the sake of pleasure. That's what he's saying. That's why many people in Hollywood and actors have to go to therapists all the time. They're depressed. They're sad. They're not fulfilled because it doesn't bring ultimate happiness. You look at verse 2, he says, I said of laughter madness, and of mirth, what does it accomplish? I mean, after you entertain yourself and there's laughter, and laughter is a gift from God. To be able to laugh, merriment. It says in the book of Proverbs that it does good like medicine. And medical science tells us that very thing, that there's biological benefits to laughter. And that's why they try to get people who are sick and have ongoing illnesses to keep a positive, upbeat attitude and encourage them to do things that they enjoy and get them to laugh because it's biologically good for your body. But if there's no ultimate point to it, there's no ultimate goal to it, it's madness. It's madness. And if mirth, merriment, what does it accomplish ultimately? What does it accomplish ultimately? So, I mean, what do you see there in verse 1 and 2 when it comes to how people are today? And what we as a society go after to please ourselves? What do you see there? What's some examples you might have? Today. Well, either way, entertainment in and of itself can be wholesome. Right. So you have that TV. I mean, TV takes up a lot of time. Programming, movies and such. That can take up a lot of time. Again, in proper perspective, there's nothing wrong with that. But when it becomes a consuming thing, a consuming pursuit, it is one of those things that becomes vanity and madness. And the point is, what does it accomplish? What is Texas known for? What's sport? Football. Is football wrong? No, nothing wrong with football. I'm not a big sports fan myself, but nothing wrong with football. Is there some things in it that are wrong that is promoted? Well, yeah, alcohol, the immodesty of the cheerleaders. We understand that. We're not dealing with that. But we understand those things are problems. But football as a sport, there's nothing wrong. Is there an inappropriate amount of attention given to football sometimes? Right. And the focus of it. Same thing with basketball. I mean, in any sport you look at, but football is really big. It's huge. You look at Jerry Jones' building, and he's going to build another complex, sports focused, and it becomes madness. It's like, really? And the focus that people put on that. So there are certain things that aren't wrong in and of themselves. They're not wrong, but when they become a focus, an idol. Right. It becomes an idol to them. What if you have a family that has their children in sports? Nothing wrong with that. But what if that becomes an all-consuming thing for that family? That their focus is on their children's sports, and they don't have time for church service. They certainly don't have time for Wednesday night. Don't have time for these things because their focus is on their kids in sports. I mean, there's a focus there that becomes unbiblical. So when we look at this, whether it be entertainment, whether it be sports, whether it be a hobby, whether it be thrill-seeking, you can look on YouTube and see some of the craziest thrill-seekers that are out there that are willing to put their life on the line for crazy stuff. I think some of it becomes a stewardship issue because if you're out there intentionally endangering your life, I think you're don't have a respect for your life and respect for the gift that God has given you. So I think that can cross a line there. There's always a risk in anything you do, but when the risk is so high that it just becomes, madness that you're going to do it. Have you seen the videos of these kids in Russia who go up to they climb up to these high abandoned buildings or whatever, like 30 or 40 stories, and they just hang off the edge with one hand. And they have their friend take a video of it. Thrill seekers. Thrill seekers, just for the rush. That's crazy. Again, that's madness. And if one of them fell to their death, there would be nothing, and they would get seriously hurt or die. There'd be no way of avoiding it. Right, they're looking for the thrill. Right. It's an addiction to adrenaline. A person can become addicted to adrenaline. Now, there's nothing wrong. Adrenaline, God created it, right? Nothing wrong going to Six Flags, getting on a roller coaster or whatever, and some are saying, no, I'm not going to do that. But there's nothing wrong with that. But to intentionally go to the edge of almost dying just for the thrill of that, because it gives you a rush. And people they're focused on the partying and the madness that goes on with that, the risk taking that goes on with that. What does it accomplish ultimately? And that's the point. He's looking at this, verse 1 and 2, out from under the sun, doing this under the sun. What's the point of partying if there's no ultimate goal in life? Right. We can have fun, but we carry it to the level that is controlling our lives, and we're forsaking the assembly, and we're forsaking studying and learning. Right. Whatever you focus on is what you worship. And that's true. If your focus is on God and His will, you're worshiping God. I mean, that's ultimately what it becomes. And when you focus on football, and that's your life, this person lives for football. You could fill in the blank. This person lives for. Paul said, for me to live is Christ. Philippians 1:21. So anything we put in the blank other than Christ is, your priorities are wrong. It doesn't matter what it is. Fun is a gift from God. Merriment, mirth, these are gifts from God, but if we get focused on it, a tree is a gift from God, but if I go out and start worshiping a tree, I've taken my focus off the Creator to worship the creature. The environment is a gift from God, but if I become one of these environmentalist type persons that focuses on the environment and neglect the spiritual, then I'm worshiping and serving the creature rather than the Creator. And Paul had something to say about that in Romans chapter 1. It's idolatry. So fun and those things, they're gifts from God. Even Jesus said, family is a gift from God, but if you love father or mother more than me, you're not worthy of me. If you love son or daughter more than me, you're not worthy of me. Priorities. Priorities. Look at verse 3. He said, I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, while guiding my heart with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under the sun all the days of their lives. Now he's talking about gratifying his flesh. He's talking about that which would do that. You know, the book of Proverbs warns against the dangers of intoxicating drink. Look at Proverbs chapter 20. Verse 1. Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 1. Wine is a mocker, strong drink is a brawler, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise. And the moment you start drinking it is when you start being led astray. That's when the intoxicating process begins with that first drink. And you look at Proverbs 23. Look at verse 29. Proverbs 23 and verse 29. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has complaints? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? Those who linger long at the wine, those who go in search of mixed wine. Do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it swirls around smoothly. At last it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things. Your heart will utter perverse things. Yes, you will be like one who lies down in the midst of the sea, or like one who lies on the top of the mast, saying, they have struck me, but I was not hurt. They have beaten me, but I did not feel it. When shall I awake that I might seek another drink? The dangers of alcohol. Here's a person with a hangover, wanting to go to it again. Wanting to go to it again. So the problems of alcohol is an age-old problem. And Solomon said, I went to try to gratify my flesh with it. Now, again, is grapes, are they a gift from God? Yeah, it's a gift from God. Grape juice is a gift from God. Certain drugs that are used for medical purposes under a physician's care are gifts from God. Thank God for painkillers. Thank God for those things that can help you when there's surgery or when there's ongoing illness. But to take it recreationally, just to get high, just to get drunk, is what he's talking about here, the sin that's there. And so he's saying, I try to gratify my flesh with these things, and I still have my wisdom to lay hold of folly, so I might see what is good for the sons of men to do under the sun all the days of their life. Is it just to pursue your own gratification, your own flesh, to do whatever you want? Now, what are some of the modern day things that would tie into verse 3 as far as gratifying the flesh when it comes to substances? Drugs. That's the broad illegal drugs, and some legal, like alcohol, nicotine, those things. Now, drugs, if used under a physician's care as a prescription, are beneficial. We're not talking about drugs that are prescribed, but even those can be abused if you're not careful. A person can get addicted to prescription drugs. So there has to be a balance there. So you have that. You have the people that try to gratify their flesh with all kinds of drugs, whether legal or illegal, things that would be detrimental to their sobriety. The New Testament commands us to be sober, and that is something that should be done. Now, there was, going back to the whole medical situation, when I had my wisdom teeth pulled, I'm glad I wasn't sober. And what I mean by that is they gave me some drugs that knocked me out. And I couldn't drive. Jennifer had to drive me home. I was under the influence of a prescription drug to help ease the pain when they pulled those wisdom teeth. And I'm thankful for that. That was a gift. However, if I started taking that drug for recreational purposes to gratify my flesh, and that's what he's talking about here, that would be sin. That would be contrary. I mean, that's the whole concept of the 1960s. Get high and check out. Just check out of reality, man. Just get high. And just don't deal with things. Get high. Well, that's gratifying your flesh. Reality isn't going anywhere. It doesn't matter how high you get. Reality is still going to be there. And the Bible tells us how to deal with reality. We put God first. We cast all our cares upon Him. Be anxious for nothing. If we did that, we wouldn't have to go get high. So, gratifying the flesh and indulging in the things of the flesh, the New Testament talks about the problem with that in various things. Look at Galatians chapter 5, gratifying the flesh. Verse 19. Galatians 5 and verse 19. Now the works of the flesh are evident, which are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness, that's sexual sin. Verse 20, idolatry, sorcery, that's be religious sin. Hatred, contentions, jealousy, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambition, dissension, heresy, envy, murders, drunkenness, revelries, and the like, of which I tell you before, just as I also told you in the time past, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. So those things do not ultimately fulfill. In fact, they bring about God's judgment. So those are things to avoid, but you have to understand the vantage point from which Solomon is pursuing this. He's pursuing this as someone who is under the sun. And even people who really aren't religiously inclined will tell you after they've lived a life, a lot of times they will, sometimes they won't ever learn. But a lot of them will tell you the way I used to party and the way I used to do things, I had to, what's the phrase? I had to settle down. I had to settle down. Because even they know the dangers and the problems of continuing that lifestyle. Now, they didn't stop or settle down for religious reasons. They just know it was self-destructive. It was wrecking their body. It was wrecking their way of thinking. And so they had to back off of it just for their own personal well-being. Oh, Galatians 5? Galatians. The works of the flesh, Galatians 5. Verses 19 through 21. I'm glad you had me go back there, because when you look at the fruit of the Spirit, which is very fulfilling, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. Now that's very gratifying, ultimately. Self-control. Now, going back to Ecclesiastes 2, he pursued all of these things. And, of course, we saw the conclusion of it in verse 11. It's vanity, like grasping for the wind. It's pointless. Pointless. So he tried with the partying, verse 1 and 2. He tried with drugs, alcohol, didn't fulfill. Verse 4, this would be his building projects. His building projects. I made my works great. I built myself houses and planted vineyards. Myself vineyards. Now I want you to think about this. Thinking about the wealth of Solomon, who had, percentage-wise, billions and billions of dollars. And think about the ability to build whatever you want. You think about the floor plan of the perfect house you would want, where you would want it. You could do it if you were Solomon. You want a house here in Texas on about 40 acres? You lay out the plans. I want that built. I want that property right there. Then I want one in the Rockies. I want a log cabin mansion in the Rockies. I'll show you where I want it. I want that land, and I want that log cabin. Then I want one in the Ozarks. I want one there, up in the Ozark Mountains. He could do it. Would be no problem. So he built himself houses and planted himself vineyards. If you wanted some sort of beautiful garden in those places, you could build it, no problem. Made myself gardens and orchards. This is not like your, okra and tomato garden. This is the beautiful parks. This is the word for parks. Arboretum, is that the word that we have nowadays? He built himself arboretums, however you say it. I said it right the first time. Don't laugh at me. I'll go another 15, 20 minutes. You laugh at me. But you go to these places in Dallas and Fort Worth where they have the fancy flowers. Solomon had those. He built them. He could do it. Say, I want that. I want 50 acres dedicated to this. He could do it. He had the money for it. Gardens, orchards, planted all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself water pools from which to water growing trees to grow. He had an elaborate watering system. The ancient people had an elaborate system of watering plants. It was not like our plumbing system with pipes, but they had aqueducts and such to water. Very advanced. And so they could have watering systems. See, remember what Solomon said in chapter 1, there's nothing new under the sun. We think plumbing is new, indoor plumbing. They had it in ancient culture. We just forgot about it over time and had to rethink about it. They had heated buildings in Rome. They had indoor toiletry in Rome. They found that in Pompeii when they went and dug all that up, how advanced they were. And we think indoor plumbing, oh, we're so advanced. We got indoor plumbing. They had indoor plumbing. Probably didn't smell great, but they had it. We're just rediscovering things that people made years ago because we forget about them and because nations rise and fall and that technology gets lost. And so they had elaborate gardens. Solomon built those, all kind of fruit trees. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees in the grove. Then he had servants to wait on him hand and foot. I acquired male and female servants, had servants born in my house. So they were generational servants, some born in his house. Yes, I had great possessions of herds and flocks, all kinds of animals. And that's how you measured wealth back then, how many animals you had. You look at Abraham. He was measured in wealth by his livestock. Also Job. Job was measured in wealth by his livestock. Then had more, greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. Then he had riches. Verse 8, I also gathered for myself silver, gold, special treasures of kings. In the provinces I acquired male and female singers, entertainment. Male and female singers and the delights of the sons of men and musical instruments of all kinds. He could have them come to his palace and perform for him. Now, having all that in mind, let's look at 1 Kings chapter 10. I wanted to try to work this in along with that before class is over with. 1 Kings chapter 10. This is looking at the building projects of Solomon. 1 Kings chapter 10 talks about the Queen of Sheba, which is probably someplace in Africa, that came to visit Solomon because of his fame went out throughout all the world. Verse 1, Now when the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. Verse 2, She came to Jerusalem with a very great, what is that word? Retinue? Company is a translation of it. Caravan, I guess you could say. With camels that bore spices, very much gold, precious stones. And when she had came to Solomon, she spoke with him all that was in her heart. So she had all this tribute to give to him. Remember, he had billions of dollars in tribute coming to him every year for 40 years. So Solomon answered all her questions. There was nothing so difficult for the king that he could not explain it to her. And when the Queen of Sheba had seen all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, the food on his table, the setting of his servants, the service of his waiters and their apparel, his cupbearers, and his entryway by which he went up to the house of the Lord, that would be the temple that he built, there was no more spirit in her. You know what that means? She almost fainted seeing all that. It was so impressive to her. Then she said to King, It was a true report which I heard in my own land about your words and your wisdom. However, I did not believe the words until I came and saw with my own eyes, and indeed the half was not told me. You've heard that expression, the half hadn't been told? It comes from this verse right here. The half hadn't been told me. Your wisdom and prosperity exceed the fame of which I heard. You know, sometimes some things can be exaggerated, and you hear about how great something is, and then you go and it's like, yeah, wasn't that great. She's saying, when I saw it for myself, it's greater than what I heard. There weren't words to express it. Verse 8, Happy are your men and happy are your servants who stand continually before you and hear your wisdom. She's saying it's happy to be a servant among Solomon. To be a servant in Solomon's palace would be a great thing, and to learn from Solomon all that wisdom. Blessed be the Lord your God who delights in you, setting you on the throne of Israel. Because the Lord has loved Israel forever, therefore he made you king to do justice and righteousness. What was the Queen of Sheba? Was she a Jew? She's a Gentile. She's a Gentile, and she is praising the God of Israel for what he has done. Verse 10, Then she gave the king 120 talents of gold, spices, a great quantity of precious stones. There never again came such an abundance of spices as the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Now look at verse 11. Also the ships of Hiram, which brought gold from Ophir, brought great quantities almug, wood, and precious stones of Ophir or Ophir. Verse 12, the king made steps of algum wood on the house of the Lord, and for the king's house also harps and stringed instruments for the singers. There never again came such algum wood, nor has the like been seen to this day. So the person recording this, whoever it was saying there was nothing like it. That was the golden age of Israel at that time. Verse 13, Now King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all she desired, whatever she asked, besides what Solomon had given her according to the royal generosity. So she turned and went to her own country, she and her servants. So there's tribute that Solomon gave to her. Verse 14, the weight of gold that came to Solomon yearly was 666 talents of gold. Now, does anyone have a Bible chart in their Bible that gives the weight of a talent? I think it's like 78 pounds. 75? So 75 pounds, one talent is 75 pounds. So if you do the math, how many pounds would 666 talents of gold be? So it's 666 times 75. That's how many pounds of gold was given to Solomon each year. That equals to be about $1.5 billion in our money, our currency. And that happened for 40 years, on top of everything else. Now you would think something like that would make a person happy. And Solomon says it doesn't. It doesn't. Look at verse 15. Beside that, from the traveling of the merchants, from the income of traders, from all the kings of Arabia, and from the governors of the countries, those who paid tribute. Verse 16, King Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold. 600 shekels of gold went into each shield. Verse 17, he also made 300 shields of hammered gold. 3 minas of gold went into each shield. The king put them into the house of the forest of Lebanon. So he had several houses, several structures besides his own palace and the temple that he built. Verse 18, moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with pure gold. I don't tell the environmentalists about the ivory, but that's what he made his throne out of. It was out of ivory. And then overlaid it with gold. I mean, that's like having Bluebell chocolate with chocolate ice, with chocolate syrup being poured on top of it. That's how rich that is. So he had this throne, this elaborate throne of ivory, overlaid it with gold, pure gold. Verse 18. Verse 19. The throne had 6 steps, and the top of the throne was round at the back. There were armrests on either side of the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood beside the armrests. They would be statues that he made. Verse 20, 12 lions stood there, one on each side of the 6 steps. Nothing like this had been made for any other kingdom. Just to be able to look at Solomon's throne would have been amazing. Why do you think there were 12 lions? 12 tribes. 12 tribes of Israel. 12 lions. Then in verse 21, all the king's drinking vessels were gold, and also the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Not one was silver, for this was accounted as nothing in the days of Solomon. Silver wasn't a big deal. It's like seeing a penny on the side of the road. Now, if you see a quarter or something, you're going to bend down and get a quarter. You see $1, you're going to bend down and get $1. You see a penny on the side of the road, most likely you're not going to put out the effort to get a penny. That's how silver was in the days of Solomon. It wasn't. There's some silver. It's no big deal. They had so much. Then it talks about the merchant ships there in verse 22. Then in verse 24, now all the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom. He had the chariots and horsemen there. And look at verse 28. Solomon had horses imported from Egypt and Kiev. So he had horses. He built stables for them. You read about that a little bit later on. He had all of these things. Now go back to Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and we'll wrap this up. Ecclesiastes chapter 2. Verse 8, I also gathered for myself silver, gold, special treasures of kings of provinces. I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, and musical instruments of all kind. Entertainment. You think about any entertainment you wanted to engage in, say, I can do it. I'm going to build myself a movie theater in my houses, surround sound. I'll build the screen as big as I want to make it. Solomon could do it. There'd be no problem. Verse 9, I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem, and my wisdom remained with me. On top of all that, he was the smartest. So you had The high education, people that want to attain to that. You had the high level of materialism. Solomon attained to that. He said in verse 10, whatever my eyes desired, I did it. Did not keep from him. He looks at something and said, I want that. He bought it. Whatever he wanted. Oh, you got about 500 horses there? I want those horses. I want to buy them. Who would not want that kind of ability? I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my labor. I looked on all the works that my hands have done, and the labor and the toil with which I toiled, and indeed it was vanity and a grasping for the wind. There is no profit under the sun. So Solomon's saying all that is empty without God. Without God. Because you are a beggar on the street, spiritually speaking, if you have all of this, if you don't have God. You're a beggar on the street, spiritually speaking. You're spiritually bankrupt without God. No matter if you have billions of dollars and housing projects and all these things. Without God, it's a waste of time. We don't have time to go into these passages, but you can look at this. We might tie this in next week. Time is up. Matthew chapter 19, verses 16 through 30, where Jesus told the rich young ruler, sell all that you have, give to the poor, then come and follow me. And he went away sorrowful. And in Revelation chapter 2, verse 8 and 9, to the Lord's church at Smyrna, he says, I know your poverty, but you're rich. They were spiritually rich, which is true riches, but physically they were poor. He said, I know your poverty, but you're rich. So the Bible talks about true riches being right with God.